Good afternoon, Saitlanders. How are you? We trust that you are well in these difficult times. Since yesterday, I've received from a number of people the video that many of you will have seen of the little Chinese kids taking apart and putting back together a pistol. Chinese kids in an apparent classroom, sitting on their little chairs at their little tabletops, taking the pistol apart and putting it back together again. I would guess that they were about 10 years old. If I was to judge my son's sizes, 3 sons, and then make some allowance for the fact that Chinese people are a little smaller than us, or quite a lot smaller than we are, roughly 10 years old. And the suggestion in the video is that this is now being done in China. No rider, no modifier, no qualification. In other words, this is now being done in China, as opposed to some people did this in China. One school, one occasion, one event.
This is in China, by the way. China. Little kids, bro. See how fast that was? First day of school, there's an article related to this. Y'all seeing this? This is crazy, bro. Amazing, too. It's amazing. There's also a second video.
So I contacted 2 people in China whom I know very well. One is my life's best friend, who has lived there for many years, and he is a teacher. And the other person is the owner, somebody I know too, owner of a small school. So they know a thing or two about the commonplace practices in the educational system in China. And I asked them if that was true. And they said it's absolute rubbish. It's completely and utterly false. They both told me the same thing. We can't give you an explanation. We don't know. Perhaps it was a one-off thing. Or perhaps it is something that is practiced at an elite school. Or perhaps it is something that is being, given that the kids are young, they're not at a military school, perhaps kids in military schools, that is to say, schools attended, schools located on military bases, built for military personnel. Perhaps that's a sort of unique thing to which their children get exposed from a young age. But by no means is it a thing in China at all. The one of the 2 people to whom I spoke said to me, however, what is quite a phenomenon at the moment is that the Chinese government is whipping up a frenzy, whipping up whipping up nationalism, whipping up patriotism, whipping up a frenzy of Chinese patriotism. And apparently they are taking every opportunity that they can to do so in schools, universities, and wherever else they have a voice to the people. Wherever they can ram it down their throats, they are ramming it down their throats. And they sent me a bunch of documents substantiating this, talking about the policy and how it must be implemented and when it must be implemented and why it must be implemented and so on. And it reminded me of something to which I've been endeavoring to draw people's attention for 2 years. This article appeared in Russia Today 2 months ago. But it is, I believe, the 4th such article, or the 5th, that I have read over time, going back about 2, perhaps 3 years. Xi Jinping warns armed forces to prepare for actual combat, so says the Chinese media. The president told troops at a Navy base that their mission is to defend the country's territorial sovereignty. In other words, he believes that they're going to be attacked, that their territorial sovereignty shall be under threat. President Xi Jinping has urged the Chinese military to prepare for real combat. National media reported on Wednesday. This is in mid-April. The remarks came days after Beijing held massive military drills around Taiwan. Taiwan, for those of you who don't know, is an island off the coast of China that was occupied by the Kuomintang nationalist forces when they were beaten by the communists in the 1940s. When they were chased out of China, they dashed across to Taiwan, and they made it their sort of castle in the sea. But China has always insisted that Taiwan was always a part of China. It is a Chinese island, and therefore it remains a part of China. And the fact that these renegade, if you like, nationalists who hate communism have taken it over doesn't mean that it's not integral to China, that it is not another country. The remarks came days after Beijing held massive military drills around Taiwan, which reportedly involved the simulation of precision strikes on the self-governing island of Taiwan. Addressing military personnel at a Navy base in southern China on Tuesday, Xi Jinping called for the strengthening of military training oriented toward actual combat. The Beijing leaders, or the Chinese leader, is reported to have named the defense of Beijing's territorial sovereignty and maritime interests, as well as the protection of overall peripheral stability. According to Taipei, Taipei is the capital of Taiwan. According to Taipei's military, it detected 9 warships and some 71 airplanes in its area the following day. And the point of this short video, ladies and gentlemen, is to remind you that it seems as if the contrived nature of the conflict in Ukraine is going to be repeated in or near China. Of course, we can't be precisely sure who is going to do what, just as we couldn't know exactly how the Ukraine war would develop, although we began talking about a major event about 4 or 5 months prior, Mr. Miller and I. And there have been many surprises along the way. However, generally speaking, we know what has transpired in Ukraine. We know that the US and Europe set up numerous chemical and biological research laboratories in Ukraine on the border with Russia in the previous years, and that it was a cause for great concern. We know that Vladimir Putin warned Ukraine that if it continued to conduct a civil war against the ethnic Russian population in the east of Ukraine, in the Donbass. Donbass standing for, as a matter of interest to you, the Don River Valley Coal Basin. The Don River is not there, but that is within that basin, and the Don River is some distance away. We know that in the 1990s, written undertakings were made by the USA and NATO that NATO would not be expanded 1 inch to the east during and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In other words, reassurances were given to Russia that even though they were in a vulnerable condition, much weakened by the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO and the USA would not take advantage of that situation. And therefore, Russia need have no fear and need not be trigger happy with nuclear weapons. They needn't be in a state of panic. They needn't be on the defensive, in anticipation of NATO expanding all the way to Russia. We know that there were 5 waves of such expansion. We know many things. Likewise, we know that the USA has talked openly about a potential war with China. We know that the Chinese have been conducting massive drills. We know that the Chinese are committed to expanding to the 9-dot line or the 7-dash line. There's more than one of these concepts in the South China Sea. We know that it has already expanded illegally in terms of maritime law, or there's a specific treaty whose name I forget now. Much further than it should have towards its overseas neighbors. In other words, where the law says that the border between the two countries is in the middle of the sea that separates them, so China has effectively made the border there. And now it is very interesting to observe how the Chinese are apparently whipping up a nationalistic frenzy among the population. Just at this time that so much is seesawing in its favor in the world. We've seen the great advantage that China and Russia and Iran and others, but principally China and Russia, have taken of the sanctions against Russia over the Ukraine war. We see how they've opened their own SWIFT system, payment system, their own credit card architecture, no longer riding on the architecture of Visa and MasterCard, which almost everybody does globally. We see how they've managed to shift suppliers of various materials to one another. So as China has lost oil and gas markets, it has created new markets at better prices for its friends. And similarly, I say to you that as the pendulum swings in their favor, it appears as if they are ready to take great advantage. And the relevance of this to you, Saitlanders, is that we're caught in the middle because South Africa is part of BRICS. So China's first loyalty, where there is a competition, is always going to be to South Africa, not uh, South Africa over Russia or South Africa over China or Brazil or India. But where there's jealousy, where there's rivalry, South Africa versus Madagascar, South Africa versus Panama, South Africa versus Djibouti, the BRICS guys are going to support one another. And we may find that as, let's say, involuntary, you and I as conservatives, as involuntary effective members of BRICS, whether we like it or not, we're on that membership list via our state, may well find that we are caught in the middle of one of the greatest clashes in mankind's history. Should this series of events that is playing out in front of us lead to a crisis between BRICS and the West, or between China and the USA, we may see that the AGOA, the threatened AGOA sanctions that the US State Department spoke about recently, and the war of words over the Lady R, the ship that docked in Simonstown Harbour and offloaded weapons, or took on weapons, depending upon whom you believe, that is just the tip of the iceberg of being caught in the middle. It may get far, far worse. You never know. But Ford may have to pull out of the country. You never know. But we may not be able to access Western markets, our farmers. You never know. Only time will tell. I leave you with that thought. We live in interesting times, and they're only going to become more interesting, or so it seems. God bless all of you. Bye-bye.